Hello from Portland. You'll notice I'm standing up. I'm going to try doing vlogs while standing up because I have a new theory that may make it easier for me to talk. Because when I was a lawyer, I used to talk all the time. But in court, you have to stand up to talk. You can't talk to a judge while you're sitting down. You would get in trouble. So I'm wondering if maybe my brain is better at finding words if I'm on my feet as opposed to sitting down. Also, standing up is generally healthier for you than sitting down. And perhaps appropriately, I'm going to be talking about legal arguments today because the federal government filed briefs this week in the Supreme Court of the United States in the gay marriage cases, which are actually two different cases. One is about California's Prop 8 and whether California voters could basically take back gay marriage. The other case is a challenge to DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, which was passed back in the 90s and signed by President Clinton. The part that's being challenged is the part that says the federal government won't recognize marriages even if they're legal in the states where they occur. So the argument I want to talk about today, though, is what's being called the 8-state solution, which is the Obama administration has argued that even if there's not a general constitutional right to marry, in the 8 states that confer basically all the rights of marriage in the form of civil unions, it is unconstitutional to deny those couples the designation of marriage because they have all the attributes of a marital relationship. Now, this hits close to home for me because Oregon is one of those 8 states. Oregon has a civil union law that is very comprehensive and very good, and that Chris and I have used in a number of legal contexts, and it makes a big difference. So if that's how the court decided the case, it would probably invalidate Oregon's constitutional amendment banning same-sex marriage. So personally, it would be good for me. I'm not sure I find the argument all that compelling as a legal matter. And I want to make an observation that I think people should be much more careful drawing a distinction between things they think are good ideas, things they think are bad ideas, and what the Constitution says. The Constitution doesn't have just free-floating clauses that say whatever strikes you as unfair or unnecessary is somehow unconstitutional. This drives me crazy about the Tea Party. They are constantly acting as if things violate the Constitution when they just don't. The Congress has very broad powers to regulate commerce. You may not like the stuff Congress does, but those powers are very broad, and they're in the Constitution. So your argument is not with the Constitution, it's with the decisions made by Congress. So the fact that I think same-sex marriage is a good thing, obviously I do, and the fact that I think the government should recognize same-sex marriage does not necessarily mean I think the Constitution requires every state to recognize same-sex marriage. There's a very strong argument that the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment requires states to recognize same-sex marriage, but that is not an open and shut case. Bear in mind, it was not that long ago, 1986, the Supreme Court held that it was not only okay for states to criminalize homosexual conduct, but that the argument for a constitutional right to homosexual conduct was, and I'm quoting here, at best facetious. Now, the Supreme Court reversed that, thankfully, in the Lawrence decision, but we're not dealing with a lot of time here that the Supreme Court has been striking blows for gay equality. If I were a justice on the Supreme Court, I would find that people should be allowed to marry other consenting adults without reference to their gender. But I can see the arguments the other way. The 8-state solution does not strike me as a particularly good argument. It would be a great argument for me personally. It would be the next best thing to having the court say every state has to recognize same-sex marriage, because it would affect the state I live in. So I'd be happy for it, but I don't think it really makes sense. I think states either do or do not have the constitutional authority to regulate marriage in this way. Whether or not they recognize other legal arrangements for same-sex couples, I don't think should come into it. And in fact, I have some qualms about the argument just because I think it eradicates a middle ground that's been, while not perfect, very good for a lot of gay and lesbian people, and that is civil unions that fall short of marriage. Obviously, marriage is the gold standard. I want to have marriage, but I can imagine a lot of places in the country that are not ready for marriage but have very broad support for legal protections for gay couples. I mean, even in Texas, which is a bad state on this issue, about 65% of Texans support some form of legal protection for gay couples. If the argument is you either have to recognize marriage or nothing, I'm afraid a lot of states will continue to say nothing. So I'm not sure the compromise position is really that helpful here. I think we're moving toward probably a very solid 20 to 30 states recognizing full marriage equality in the next 10 years. I think that's a pretty safe prediction. I think if we leave the option of civil unions on the table, we could very well put another dozen states on the list of places that recognize full protections for gay couples. And I'll just tell you, as someone who lives in a state that doesn't recognize marriage but does recognize civil unions, it really does make a difference. It's easy to say we won't settle for anything less than the ideal here, but what you're saying to a lot of gay couples in the middle parts of the country is you've just got to wait till everybody who opposes gay marriage dies and then you can get married. But we can't have any intermediate measures between now and then. So I can understand the arguments for the 8-state solution, and as a resident of one of those 8 states, it would be great. I just don't think it's a very good legal argument, and I don't think it's politically the best positioning if we're trying to achieve full marriage equality eventually, but maximum legal protection for gay couples and their children in the short term. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.